All right. I think it looks like we've got everyone who registered on. Um, so we can go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to the Community Coordination and Outreach meeting for Sullivan County, New Hampshire. As I said before, my name is Molly Cox. I'm the Compass PTS Study Manager for this preliminary. And this time I'd like to hand it over to the state to introduce themselves. Sarah, if you could introduce.
I
Sarah,
just
do you have?
clicked her over to presenter. So Sarah, I think you
Okay,
can
great.
unmute your own line now.
Hey, I'm sorry. Me, Sarah, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Sarah Thunberg, the NFIP coordinator from the Office of Planning and Development in New Hampshire. I don't have any slides prepared to share, but yeah, I'm here for questions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And then FEMA. I think there's a couple on from FEMA Region 1, if you could introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Colleen Bailey, and I'm from FEMA Region 1. I'm a project specialist here at the region. We do have a small army here today, so I'll let everyone else introduce themselves. Nice to see everyone here today.
Hi, good afternoon. Nick Broderick. I'm a civil engineer here at FEMA Region 1.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin DeWolf. I am also a civil engineer at FEMA Region 1.
Great. I think that's everyone from the region. And then last but not least, if the representatives from ARC could introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi, my name is Alex Sorotek. I'm the FEMA Region 1 Service Center lead. I help coordinate these projects and also helping coordinate some of the transition between mapping providers, because Molly and Nicole are from Compass, but this whole project will be handed over and moving forward under ARC, which is the new contracting organization, and that stands for Advancing Resilience in Communities. And Matt?
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Richards. I'll be serving as the post-preliminary processing lead, moving this forward and getting this project through due process under ARC.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And thank you all for taking the time to join. A bit of general housekeeping before we begin. As I mentioned before, you can enter your questions in the chat as we go, or we'll have microphones unmuted at the end and you can ask them then if you prefer. There are some tips at the bottom here for how to make the slides easier to read, if the text is too small or if the contrast isn't good. And with that, I'll start the meeting. So for the agenda today, we'll talk a bit about the project timeline from the beginning until now, and then we'll go into what happens after today. We'll go through the studies we've done for this portion of the county and introduce the map change viewer. Then I'll talk a bit about the regulatory and non-regulatory products that come out of these studies. After that, I'll be handing it over to Matt Richards and Alex Sorotek to talk about the post-preliminary process and hazard mitigation and flood insurance. And it looks like Carrie has joined from Region 1. Carrie, we had done introductions before, but if you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Carrie Bogdan, Risk Analysis Branch Chief. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so for the timeline from sort of the beginning until today, the first community meetings were the discovery meetings, which were held in 2018. The update for Sullivan contains 3 different watersheds. We've got the Conticook, a little bit of Pemigewasset, and Middle Connecticut. So some of the communities will see multiple sets of these meetings. The next meetings are the work map meetings, which were opportunities to provide comments on the floodplain maps ahead of preliminary, and those all happened between 2021 and 2022. Following the work map meetings, the data was all compiled into the draft firm databases and delivered to communities as part of the 621 compliance period. And that was another opportunity to view the floodplains and provide comments before the preliminary mapping. For Sullivan, these took place in 2021 and in 2024. And then here we are today at the CCO meeting. We're going to review the changes made in the 2021 preliminary, which included the Conticook and Pemigewasset updates, and the 2024 revised preliminary, which added the Middle Connecticut watershed updates to the study. Finally, during the LFD compliance period between LFD and effective, the open house meeting will be held. This slide shows just a general timeline of the post-preliminary phase. We have the prelims that were issued in December of 2021 and the revised prelim in July of 2024. We're currently here having the CCO meeting, and then the appeal start is currently planned for late this year. Once the appeal period begins, you'll have 90 days to review the products and submit any official comments or appeals to the data. Assuming nothing prevents it from moving forward, the study will then go LFD, or letter of final determination. Then there's a 6-month period to update your ordinances and adopt the new products. After that 6-month period, the products become effective and you'll use them for all your planning purposes after that point. There are 5 communities in Sullivan County that were impacted by the prelim. They're shown in dark gray here on this slide. And for why might the floodplain map floodplain boundaries be different? There are 3 general types of floodplain studies that FEMA funds: new detailed redelineation, and new approximate. All of the updates for this Sullivan prelim are new approximate studies, meaning there is new approximate modeling that was performed on new topography with new aerial imagery, and Zone A studies. Zone A floodplains were produced. There are no published BFEs on the firms, and no new detailed or new redelineation studies. This map here shows the distribution of the studies in the community. The blue lines are the watershed boundaries, and you can see there's 3 watersheds that were included in this study. A very small bit from the Pemigewasset watershed, some from the Conticook watershed, and then a little bit of Middle Connecticut in the southeast portion of the watershed. All right, now we'll talk a bit about how to view the data. This slide shows an excerpt from FEMA's Flood Map Change Viewer that is available at the Map Service Center. The link on the slide will be live when we send the slides out after the meeting. This shows the effective products, the preliminary products, and then once the products go through LFD, they will be shown as pending products. I encourage you to play around with the various views and layers here so you can see how the mapping has changed in your communities. You can search in the search box in the upper left for a specific address and it will take you right there. Or you can just sort of zoom in and pan around to look at your community that way. You can also toggle the layers on and off to get an idea of how the flooding has changed as well. Here's an example from the map change viewer showing how the maps have changed. On the left here, you'll see the effective firm from 2006 showing what the flooding looks like on the current map. And then on the right, you can see what the proposed preliminary data shows and sort of how it's different. So I definitely encourage you to play around with the viewer, go to specific places in your community that you might think of, see how the mapping has changed, explore around like that. All right, so for regulatory products, with this preliminary, there are a few different types of regulatory products. We have the flood insurance rate maps, which are usually referred to as FERMs. These are the map panels that show the floodplains. We have the flood insurance study, or FIS, which is the report that lists all of the methods used and holds a lot of extra details in tables and figures. And then we have the FIRM database, which stores the digital data used to produce the FIS and FIRMs. If you have GIS capabilities, you can download that database and view it in your local GIS. If you don't have GIS capabilities, that map viewer that we just looked at is a great tool for looking at your data. So here you see that there is a new firm panel format. So since the last effective maps in 2006, there's been a change in the format of the firm panels. They're still showing the same information, and in some cases, even more detailed information, but the layout has changed a bit. You can see the colors are a bit different. The format is a bit different, but all the information is still there. So there are 12 firm panels included in this update. And this slide shows the panel count per community, how many panels are in each affected community. And you can see that which panels were included just in the original 2021 prelim, and then which panels were included in the revised prelim this year, which added the Middle Connecticut data. All right, now we'll do a bit of an overview of the non-regulatory products that the region provides, which are known as flood risk products. So it's important to note that the flood risk products are only available for the Contoocook and Pemigewasset watersheds and not the Middle Connecticut watershed for this study. So we've got two different types of flood risk products here. The water surface elevation grid, which shows the flooding elevation across the 1% annual chance floodplain. And then we have the flood depth grid, which shows the flooding depth across the 1% annual chance floodplain. You do need some sort of GIS capabilities to display these. And then on the next slides, we'll see what they look like and how you can get them. So here's an example of the water surface elevation grid. So you can see it's displayed with a color gradient to show just an overview of how the elevation changes across the floodplain. You can also get down to a cell level and vary it sort of grid cell by grid cell to see elevations at an exact point. And then here we have the flood depth grid. It's a similar looking product, but instead of showing elevations, it shows the depth of flooding at each grid cell. This is calculated by taking the difference between the water surface elevation grid that we just saw and the ground surface elevation. Looking at this map, you can see that the deep red is the channel, which makes sense. It's the deepest part. And then as you move away from the channel, it gets shallower. But you can also see there are some depressions where the depth increases and then decreases, so it isn't just a uniform depth across the entire floodplain. This is just a good tool for visualizing how deep the water will be at any given spot in the floodplain. All right, and then accessing the flood risk products. The flood risk products are available for download at FEMA's engineering library site. Again, the link on the screen will be active in the slides that are shared. So to find them, you just search the watershed name so Contoocook or Pemigewasset, and select FRP studies as the project type. The product type in the filters on the left. The resulting link will bring you to a list of available products, and the water surface elevation grid and the depth grid will be part of the zip file with GeoTIFFs in the name. As I mentioned earlier, you will need to have some sort of GIS capabilities to view these, as there isn't a viewer like there is for the regulatory products. All right, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Richards to talk about the post-preliminary processing phase of the project.
Great, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about post-preliminary processing, or PPP. So now that you have your preliminary maps, it's important to note some of the key responsibilities that each community has with the preliminary firms. So first bullet point there, FEMA wants you all to review your preliminary firms and make any notes for corrections, comments, and potential appeals that you might have for any errors or mistakes that you do notice in the maps. Also, conduct outreach to those citizens that are affected by the changes on the firms. Molly talked a little bit about the changes viewer that you have access to online. That's a great tool to be able to see what areas are moving into the special flood hazard area that might not have been before. So those areas are a good area to conduct outreach for those folks that will soon be mapped in the special flood hazard area. And then eventually adopt a new floodplain ordinance that meets the National Flood Insurance Program requirements. So this was covered, but important links here for viewing the preliminary data. Couple options, the Map Service Center is the link there to download and view preliminary data. And then there's also a link there for a backup website for downloading preliminary data. Both very useful to get that information and view it locally. So this slide was covered before, but important notes here. ARC is taking this over at the PPP phase here. So our goal is to get this appeals period beginning late this year. So I'll highlight there the appeal period begin late 2024, and then the other dates as you move forward through the PPP process should fall into place. So what comes next after the CCO meeting here? So FEMA will publish a notice in the Federal Register announcing the new flood maps for the communities. And following that Federal Register publication, there will also be 2 local newspaper publications. These are typically done 7 days apart. And after Federal Register and newspaper notices, that's when the statutory 90-day appeal period will begin. The appeal period actually will start on the same day as that second newspaper publication. And then fast forward through the appeal period, any comments or appeals that are submitted will obviously be reviewed and resolved accordingly. And then after all comments and appeals are resolved, a letter of final determination, or LFD, will be issued by FEMA. And that's notifying each community that those flood hazard determinations will go final and that these new maps will go effective in 6 months. And between that LFD issuance and the effective map date, there will be that open house meeting to answer questions that the public might have. So just a general overview for appeals. So an appeal is a formal objection to the addition or modification of any of these items here. Preliminary BFEs or flood depths, special flood hazard area boundaries or zone designations. Important to note, newer delineations are often based off of simply more detailed or more recent topography. And appeals can also come in for regulatory floodway boundaries. Another important note, an appeal must be based on data that shows that the flood hazard information presented in the preliminary maps is scientifically or technically incorrect. So FEMA would be expecting any appeal to accompany some data to support that claim. And appeals must be submitted during that statutory 90-day appeal period. Comments are also accepted during this time. So what is a comment? Comments are objections to non-appealable changes in the map. Typically, these are base map features. They could be common ones are incorrect or misspelled road names or stream names, flooding sources of any kind, perhaps political boundary or municipal boundary changes, or updates that you want to see in the map. That can be submitted as a comment, or just generally any other base map errors that you see in the maps. Individual property owners or community officials can submit appeals or comments during this period. Summary of map actions. So after the appeal period, once the LFD is issued, the communities are also receiving what is called a SOMA, or Summary of Map Action, followed by the revalidation letter. So when the revised firm becomes effective, all the previous map changes are superseded by that new firm. So the Summary of Map Actions is a way for FEMA to comment on the validity of those letters of map change moving forward with those new maps. So the SOMA document will identify if a current LOMAC is either likely to be incorporated into the new panels, is superseded by the new study or the new information, or if that letter of map change is going to be revalidated once those new maps go effective. And the revalidation letter, which communities will receive closer to the effective date of the firm, will list those previously issued letters of map change that have been revalidated for the new firm. So more on summary of map actions. The screen grab you see there on the right side is a sample of the preliminary summary of map actions that communities would receive if they had LOMACs. And again, this is an assessment of all existing LOMACs, letters of map change, compared with the new firm. So as part of the mapping process, all LOMACs are reviewed by FEMA's contractor and revalidated by letter if appropriate as part of this map update process. And LOMACs are legally binding changes to the map. So the summary of map action breaks those LOMACs down into 4 categories. The first category would be for LOMACs incorporated into the new maps. So this is LOMACs that go into category 1 are a little more rare. These are typically reserved for your letters of map revision that are actually going to be physically incorporated into the new maps. Category 2 is LOMACs that are not incorporated. And despite that sounding bad, this is actually a good category. LOMACs not incorporated are typically due to scale limitations in the map. So this will be your typical letter of map amendment for a residential structure. Those aren't going to be actually incorporated into the map, but they will still remain valid once they're placed in the category 2. And category 2 is actually split up to 2A and 2B. 2A will list all LOMACs falling on revised panels as part of the study, and 2B is LOMACs on unrevised panels, but all category 2 is LOMAs that remain valid after the new maps go effective. Moving on, category 3, these are going to be LOMACs that are superseded by the new data. So these LOMACs would no longer be valid once the new mapping goes effective. There could be a number of reasons for that, superseded by new mapping, elevations, new H&H, or potentially these could be superseded by another LOMAC. But they'll all be listed in the SOMA under category 3, and FEMA does provide communities with a brief summary of why that LOMAC was superseded. And then finally, another rare category, but category 4 LOMACs are those to be redetermined. And this category is typically reserved for multi-lot LOMACs. So for example, a LOMA issued for a residential structure and a garage, a detached garage. Under the new maps, if both those determinations for both structures don't remain the same, that LOMAC could go into category 4 and need to be redetermined based off the new maps. So essentially that'll go back to FEMA's MT1 or LOMA contractor, and it'll be reissued based off the new data shortly after the maps go effective. And then as mentioned, the revalidation letter, that's going to be the final letter that carries all valid LOMACs forward with the new mapping. And that's distributed to the communities, FEMA's regional office, the NFIP state coordinator, but it's important to know that's not distributed to individual applicants or homeowners. So there is some outreach to get that letter around. That does have to be done, but it is also available for all communities where a revalidation letter is issued on the MAP Service Center. So a couple other notes on post-preliminary processing. The compliance period and MAP adoption period begins on the date of that LFD, or letter of final determination, and ends on the effective date for the MAP. So that's a 6-month period. Community officials review and, if appropriate, revise the community's floodplain ordinance to ensure that they are compliant with the NFIP regulations. And they do that to avoid potential suspension from the NFIP. So as the community, you must adopt a compliant floodplain management ordinance. And there is help for that. You can contact the NFIP coordinator's office for help with model language for that ordinance, and also for questions that you might have. And once the state has reviewed the ordinance and the community has adopted it, the ordinance does have to be approved by FEMA. And that has to happen before the close of the business day when those new MACs go effective. And that's it for post-preliminary. I'll send it to Alex to talk about hazard mitigation and flood insurance.
Great. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, a bit of a pivot from just looking at the actual maps and their adoption to other things that we can do with them. So there's many different types of mitigation actions that can be informed by the data from these preliminary maps or from those non-regulatory products that Molly discussed. And ways you can protect your community, like most of the time, people kind of jump to thinking of bigger structural things when they think of mitigation actions, things like levees or flood walls or acquisitions, retrofits, all those sorts of things. But there's many other cost-effective ways that you can protect your community from flood risk. And a lot of that can be done through things like zoning or building ordinances, through outreach, and through protecting the wetlands and resources that already provide flood prevention benefits, like marshes. And if you were to do anything like take any of those actions, you're not on your own. There are many different grant opportunities. And that HMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance has post-disaster and pre-disaster grants. So there's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, which is post-disaster, so helping your community get back on its feet if some event does happen. But then there's also the pre-disaster mitigation and flood mitigation assistance grants that are more proactive to take steps to where you know you may have a potential issue to provide more protection for your community in case something does happen. And for any of these, your community does have to have an active adopted mitigation plan, and there is some cost sharing between local and state. And overall, these are managed by the states, and they set the priorities and kind of choose what would be the most beneficial in their state. And the state hazard mitigation officer is the main contact for that. And Sarah Thunberg can also help you get in contact with the right folks. And all of these grants, the whole goal is to reduce the risk to life and property. And aside from FEMA's grants, there's many other different organizations that could potentially have grants, and the states can also help you find some of those if you need them. And those can come from NOAA, Bureau of Land Management, Army Corps, USDA, HUD. Many different organizations have grants that could be applicable. And aside from just benefits to your community to, protect life and property, there's also some benefits for your homeowners in your communities for insurance rates, and that's through the community rating system, or CRS. Basically, the more actions your community takes, it can count towards points in this community rating system, and that can actually reduce the flood insurance rates to homeowners in your community by around 5 to 15%, depending on how much your community does. And again, you have to have that hazard mitigation plan. You have to be in full compliance with the NFIP, and you can talk to your state representatives, including Sarah, to get more information on that. And that is basically it. So Molly, do you want to take it back for final contacts? like I said, I'll just go through this, I guess. There's only one slide left. There's Sarah at the state. There's, like we said, it's me and Matt are representatives from ARC, Advancing Resilience in Communities, and we'll be moving this project forward. And at the region, Carrie Bogdan is the main contact right now. Chris is actually moving over to another branch, but he's also somebody that you could see and be involved with, since he helps out with more specific flood hazard mitigation issues. And for general questions, there's the FMIX is what it's called, the FEMA Mapping and Insurance Exchange number and email address for any general questions. You can get all your maps at msc.fema.gov. And for general information on the NFIP, there's floodsmart.gov. And now I'll hand it back to you, Molly, if you want to open the lines for any questions.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Matt. If anyone has any questions, feel free to, I believe you should be able to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. Let me check with Nicole.